Are existing programs being expediently reduced, reused, recycled into adaptation projects? Are revenue streams and funding sources identified? Who should foot the bill? How do we mainstream adaptation into development cooperation, especially for technology transfer? Let me just make a quote from Uruguay President Jose Mujica. Life has shown us that when there is scarcity, it is the weakest that ends up paying the price. Lastly, climate impacts are local and locally differentiated. Local ownership of MDGs are key to their attainment. Communities do a far better job because it is their lives and their future that are at stake. Thus, the fifth argument for mainstream adaptation is that effective adaptation compels localization of interventions. So are the MDG targets being allocated to provinces, regions, or cities? Once allocated, is the adaptation effort proportional to offset and overcome the risk to these targets? Are local governments and communities endowed with the primary authority and therefore accountability to design and implement adaptation strategy? Are national policies, especially NAPAs, sufficiently informed by local participation? Is national guidance the healthiest form or pattern of central government engagement? And on a broader level, how do we configure development cooperation, inevitably chaperoned by conditionalities, so it leverages rather than stifle local initiative and complements self-reliance rather than breed new varieties of dependency? Those are my only 5 questions for the panel. Thank you very much and good morning.
Thank you very much, Joey Salceda. Can I just ask you something before we open the floor to the other panelists? You mentioned when it comes to mainstreaming adaptation into the development planning, the item budgeting. And something that has occurred to me many times in our budgeting, do you, when you do this in the Philippines, introduce the concept of green accounting? This is something that is not really mentioned very much in the discussions, from what I can see. Is this something that you have thought about there when, for example, when you budget?
On the local level.
Press the button. Yeah.
Yeah, on the local level, we've been trying to incorporate green accounting, but given the expediency and the urgencies of the requirements, like we have, Albay has 21 typhoons a year. So general, I think much of the adaptation involves preparation or risk reduction and essentially response and then recovery and rehabilitation. So, but the general principle is that on top of the 5% calamity fund, which is now being called adaptation fund, the province earmarks additional 4% for adaptation over and above. So we keep the 5% calamity fund as a response fund and 4% for risk reduction. That's how we look at it right now.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Not yet.
Yeah, right, in other words, not yet, yeah. And it's Albay province you're the governor of, or not Albay as I pronounced it, so I'm corrected there as well. I would like to ask Charles Earhart, Dr. Charles Earhart, Climate Change Coordinator of CARE International's Poverty, Environment and Climate Change Network in Vietnam, to speak first for the maximum of 3 minutes, to stress that again. Dr. Earhart is currently coordinating CARE International's global response to climate change. And in this role, he leads a secretariat providing strategic direction and technical support to operations in nearly 70 of the world's poorest countries. Charles has a PhD in social anthropology, which is not easy to say at this time of the morning, from the University of Cambridge in England, and has published and presented widely on poverty and environmental change. Charles.
Somebody else's name was first, so I thought I was going to get another breather, but okay.
Sorry about that.
This actually might work out well, because what I would like to do is start by just kind of summarizing this term, or looking at how this term mainstreaming is used. I think that in lots of conversations I've had with people, I see a lot of confusion, and part of the reason is that the same term mainstreaming is used within different contexts. And there are at least 4 related contexts in which we're using this term mainstreaming. One has to do with mainstreaming adaptation into development finance and development cooperation. And I should say that within this, it's implicit that what we're talking about is public finance, development finance. Second, we use the term mainstreaming to speak about when we're talking about government plans and processes at all levels. So mainstreaming adaptation into development planning at national level and throughout the decentralized structures of government. Third, we talk about the need to mainstream climate change thinking and adaptation thinking across the different sectors. And of course, there's a historical legacy to why this was so important. Initially, climate change was associated as an environmental issue. Therefore, the only people who should be talking about it is the Ministry of Environment, Natural Resources, whatever it's called in a particular country. So this also is a very important dialogue. Fourth, at least, there is a discussion about the need to mainstream or sometimes to integrate adaptation thinking within projects or specific interventions, and this is where we frequently are talking about climate proofing or making our interventions or designs climate smart, more resilient, basically. And I think that it's important to be clear that there are these different dialogues around mainstreaming when we turn to this question, is it important? What's the point? Because the rationale for mainstreaming is different according to which dialogue we're engaged in. They're related rationales, but they are distinct. So let's look at what some of those are. Certainly, when we talk about mainstreaming in development finance and development cooperation, one of the main rationales there is that we want to use the resources that we have, both financial and human, efficiently. And this is about creating synergies and making adaptation investments better, all right? Now, when we switch and we begin talking about mainstreaming in government plans and processes, hold on here. Again, it's related. What we want to do is we want to make development investments better, right? So when we're talking about mainstreaming climate change thinking into sectoral plans and processes, we want to make sure that our investments in development, that's going to stand the test of time, all right? But there's another way of looking at this, that our investments in adaptation, we want to make that better, right? We want to create more synergies there. Another rationale, when we come down to that question of why mainstream throughout the different levels of governance, that's important because we need to make government planning processes at these different levels more manageable. Already, many governments and decentralized structures are struggling with the mandates to do development planning, to do disaster risk planning, et cetera, et cetera. If we try to add in additional demands and additional processes on adaptation, they're going to be even more overwhelmed than they already in many cases are. So there's a need to kind of mainstream and think about how we're going to expect them to deal with all of these related but distinct challenges. So the point there is that we need to be clear about the rationale, and the rationale varies based on what dialogue we're engaged with, this horizontal versus vertical mainstreaming, et cetera. But what to me is interesting is that this entire dialogue tends to revolve around mainstreaming within government processes and government systems. And while this is a very important area that we need to consider, there is mainstreaming happening in other areas as well. Civil society at all levels is also engaged in mainstreaming. NGOs are looking at how to mainstream climate change thinking into development interventions as well into their strategies for how to deal with poverty. And then even at some smaller levels, at the level of CBOs and even households, people are also mainstreaming climate change, the impacts of climate change into their thinking about how they are going to confront or deal with their development aspirations. And I think that this is important to recognize that there are many different actors and different kinds of institutions confronting the mainstreaming challenge because there are lessons that can be shared between these different groups, not just between states. And I think that this is especially important because, again, a lot of this dialogue around mainstreaming frequently seems to assume that the energy and the innovation for adaptation is going to come from top-down processes. And I think that that's a killer assumption here. I think that in many cases, the policies that we need to focus on are not those that are going to be highly prescriptive for adaptation, but policies that are going to be enabling and going to allow different stakeholders at all kinds of different levels in the private sector, non-for-profit sector, to unleash their creativity and energy to bring to this challenge. So I think that that's really all the messages that I would like, and I've exceeded my 3 minutes.
Yes, you have, Charles, but thank you very much for that. You've said a lot of interesting things there that I hope will stimulate debate a little bit later. For people like myself, the layman here, I can't help listening to you, and this is not just related to what you just said. This is just generally, and I don't expect you to answer this or anyone else right now, but perhaps from the audience or yourselves later, that all this adaptation stuff, isn't it sort of shutting the gate after the horse is bolted? But anyway, that's just a sort of slight thought that I just had to share with you. I would like the gentleman on my right, Joydeep Gupta, to speak next. He is the director of the Internews Earth Journalism Network Third Pole Project, and he's from India. The third pole being the Himalayas region, the North Pole, the South Pole, and the Himalayas region. A director of the Internews Earth Journalism Network Third Pole Project, Joydeep has been lead trainer at a number of workshops for environmental journalists from South Asia and Southeast Asia, and has written on environmental issues since covering the Bhopal gas leak disaster in 1984. Some of us go back to that time. He specializes in issues related to climate change, clean energy, biodiversity, water pollution, and green businesses. He convenes meetings on regional environmental issues among policymakers, think tanks, voluntary organizations, and the media, and teaches environmental journalism to final year postgraduate students at Jamia Millia Islamia, one of India's top journalism teaching institutes. He has covered the 2008 UNFCCC summit in Poznan, Poland, the 2010 summit in Cancun, Mexico to come, and the 2009 summit in Copenhagen, as well as the meetings in the run-up to the summit, and he's edited books for postgraduate students on biodiversity loss and environmental studies. Joydeep is the secretary too of the Forum of Environmental Journalists in India.
Good morning, everyone. Stuart, as usual, is far too kind. Okay, let's get on with it. I wanted to show you this lovely sunrise picture for a specific reason. The specific reason being that that glacier, little glacier that you see in the middle, used to come down to the bottom of the valley and no longer does so. It's in the, for those who know the area, this was taken right next to the Rohtang Pass, the Pir Panjal range of the Himalayas. And the fact that that glacier no longer comes till the bottom of the valley has forced changes in the cropping pattern. So this is what we are talking about when we are talking about the effects at the local level. Let me show you another one. It's at the mouth of the Ganges. This is a little riverine island at the mouth of the Ganges, and what the village headmaster is pointing to is a coconut stump, tree stump, which is all that is left of his house. That's where his house used to be 7 years ago. This photo was something I took in March last year. This was the third house he had built, because the rising sea had engulfed 2 of his houses. And I had taken this photo standing in front of his house. Just behind him is an 18 feet high deck, behind which his then house stood. And that was in March. And in July, his third house was also engulfed. Let's talk about what the people are saying from the ground. We all know that we have this situation where people are aware at the ground level that there are serious changes happening in their weather patterns and as a result of their cropping patterns. They may not always know, in fact quite often they don't, the connection between extra greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and this, but they know the effects because they face it every day. And their problem is how to handle this. In the average South Asian farmer, and in many cases the average Southeast Asian farmer as well,